Hi everybody and welcome to another piano comparison video here on the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. Today we've got the FP90X from Roland up against Casio's brand new PX-S7000. We've had many requests for this comparison, and in some ways it's an unlikely comparison because there's such a huge difference in so many areas between these two pianos. But there are some interesting points of similarity as well, and so we are going to take a look at its action, talk about the sound, the speaker system, some of the other functionality and interface, and really try and give you a full comprehensive round out of both. Thanks so much for joining us today. If it's the first time that you are seeing us here, please hit that subscribe and the notification bell because we'd love to have you back, and it really helps us keep making videos here on the channel. So without further ado, let's dive right in with the comparison of the PX-S7000 and Roland's FP90X right away. We already said that this is an 88-note instrument in both cases, loaded up with a lot of high-quality tones, and the focus really being on the acoustic piano side of things. Now, there's a fundamental difference between how these two instruments create its acoustic piano tone in the first place. This uses a sample-based, multi-dimensional morphing. I mean, every manufacturer has florid language to describe their own tone generator. It's almost kind of comical just how romanticized they all get. They're all guilty of it. But the closest comparison, from my understanding of the mechanics of how all these tone engines work, would probably be the tone engine that Kawai uses on its CA7999 and the Nova series in terms of a multi-dimensional morphing sound engine. Essentially, they're using more than just stereo samples. There's multiple samples from various points around the instrument. And then depending on the preset, or in the case of the Casio, how it's played, it's drawing on different samples, whereas the Kawai, you can usually define which samples it's drawing from based on the preset, but that's the idea. The important thing is it's a sample-based and it's a really high quality sample. On the Roland, they are using modeling, and so this is going to be the pure acoustic modeling, and that is only for the acoustic piano sounds. The rest of them are either just sample-based or supernatural-based, depending on which one it is. But for the modeling engine, that means that you get limitless polyphony, and instead of having a real recording of a piano be the kind of the center of the algorithm, it's actually generating that tone mathematically. This is very similar to how the VST Piano Tech operates. So it's not working from a recording, it's actually starting completely from scratch every time you press a note algorithmically, building that waveform using mathematical equations. So, you know, both have their merits, and we've talked about this in a number of videos. I'm not going to really have that issue be the kind of the main wedge issue on this video, but you can go and explore Roland, you know, piano modeling versus sampling as a whole separate topic. We've done a number of videos that touch on this, but that's certainly one difference. Before we get really too far into it, I want to play these two instruments, give you a sense of the sound that each generates, and really focusing on the acoustic piano side of things, because of course that's kind of the focus of the whole channel. So let's start with the Casio, and I've got it on the New York Grand So not so secretively, that is a New York Steinway D that has been sampled, and the same one that you will find on their 310 and 510 model. This is the Hamburg Grand, which is Hamburg Steinway D. And then the Berlin, which is a C. Bechstein D282. With the onboard speakers, that Berlin Grand, that Bechstein actually is probably the best match tone to what the speakers naturally produce. With the New York being my second choice and the Hamburg being my third choice. Now let's listen to the modeling engine that we've got over here on the Roland FP90. So this is concert piano. Here's stage grand. Concert ballad. concert mellow, concert bright, so it goes through a number of variations here. Some of which I really like, some of which I don't think are really that great. Really don't like any of the uprights in there, but some of the grands I very much like. I like concert ballad, I like concert piano. Very, very, very different. Now, being a modeling engine, the Roland certainly gives you more parameters with which to play with when you're modifying or customizing that piano tone. So when you get into the functions, and you can go into Piano Designer, which is also available as an app, but very easy to use. Then you've got lid, key off noise, hammer noise, duplex, full scale, key off resonance, cabinet resonance. Whew, a lot of stuff there. Even single note editing, single character, or single note tuning and single note character, kind of like timbre adjustments that you can get into there. On the Casio, you have some of the same type of functionality. So if you go into Acoustic Simulator, you do have string resonance, damper resonance, open string, aliquot, damper noise, key on, key off. So 7 versus well into the teens, but it's a similar approach. So in terms of where most users are going to judge these two, I think the fact that they both have a pretty broad ability to affect and edit those tones, I think will be seen as a fairly parallel offering for professionals or people who might actually be using the FP90 in a recording capacity. Those extra tweaks, particularly the individual note tweaking, is certainly going to elevate the FP90's capabilities over that of the Casio. But as we will get to a little later in the video, the intended audience for these two instruments, I just do not think is really that overlapping. So we'll talk about that a little later. From a polyphony standpoint, you've got 256 notes worth of polyphony on the PX-S7000. For everything except acoustic piano, you've also got 256 notes here on the Roland. As we already said, when we're in those first acoustic piano sounds, it's modeling, so really hypothetically it's limitless polyphony until you run out the processor, which is not that possible. The BMC chip that's now in these things has a lot of headroom on it. Beyond the piano tones, this has over 400. You have, I think, 384 or something like that on the FP90X. I may not have that number exactly right, but it's in that range. So they've got very similar breadth of non-acoustic piano sounds. And they both have easy ways of navigating to those sounds. You've got your most popular, I guess, categories that you can access here. And then once you're into it, there's your general MIDI 2 bank, and that's what runs up your count well into the 300s. On the Casio, I dare say that once you get into some of those extended or expanded sounds, the quality of the samples Casio's got, in a lot of cases, is a little bit richer and more interesting than what you have on the Roland. So depending on what those additional sounds that you actually enjoy doing, you may actually find yourself drifting towards this one. So at the very least, certainly competitive in terms of the quality and the thickness of the tone, but the sheer number of sounds you get in those extra categories on the Casio without tipping into the general MIDI 2 sound bank is actually quite a bit more than what you have on the Roland. So some interesting comparisons there. I think on the Roland, a couple of categories that definitely are going to outdo the Casio would be the electric organ sounds and your ability to get in there and have sort of a Leslie option or a Leslie feature turned on or turned off. Let's talk about the speakers as well before we move too far past this sound discussion. The FP90 is equipped with 60 watts worth of rated power, and it's got 4 speakers that are delivering that. So we've got a main speaker and tweeters, all of which are located sort of in this sound bar right here. We've got some tone ports across the back. I think at one point I was even convinced there was tweeters coming straight out of there. Turns out that those are really just kind of like sound ports or sound vents for some secondary sound leak out the back. But really all of the speaker sort of projection is really coming up the top of there. And this is a beefy piano when it comes to how much sound it produces. 60 watts, and I know that wattage generally can't be used as an absolute barometer of what you're going to get. But when you compare similar instruments, it's relatively still helpful. I've mentioned before there are some gig settings where the speakers on board an FP90X are actually quite sufficient for the size of the room. Obviously in a banquet hall, a bar, a loud restaurant, like none of those are going to work very well. For small church services, wedding ceremonies, even some cocktail receptions, depending on the setting, this actually provides enough sound reinforcement you don't even need an amp. Over on the Casio, we have 4 speakers. They're all the same. They're 8 watts apiece. So we've got 32 watts worth of rated power. And can you hear a difference between these two? Yeah, absolutely. If you've got this in the middle of a room, you're not right up against a wall, and you set the position, because this allows you to do that, you can actually get right in here, go to function, go to sound, piano position. I have it in center because it's kind of in the center of a room. And if you do that and it boosts the EQ for some of those frequencies that would normally get swallowed up so that it's a little more balanced, and you're at least at 60%, 60-70% of the maximum volume on the Casio, you do get a nice full tone. But there's just absolutely no comparison in terms of just the sheer brute force that the FP90 puts out. Now, there's a big big difference in the weight and obviously the footprint of this instrument. And this is where a lot of users are going to kind of have to weigh out pros and cons, because there is definitely a con of lugging around, 50-pound plus instruments to gigs if you're gigging quite a bit, especially if you don't need a lot of the functionality that the FP90 delivers. And so I think there's a portion of the professional crowd that is actually going to be quite interested in the S7000. I think there's also a portion of the hobbyist crowd, probably even a larger one, that's going to really like a lot of the things on the 7000. So to wrap up this sound section, in my view, from a signal standpoint, you've got very competitive instruments here. I like a lot about what Casio has done with those 3 samples. I liked it on the 510. The fact that they've now got it on a portable product is great, because it was a great piece of technology, great piece of recording and sampling, and now it's available in something that is like 30 pounds, which is awesome, and definitely up at a professional tier, which is not something that some people will be used to associating with Casio when we're talking about this kind of category. On the Roland, you definitely have the speakers just out horsepowering the Casio, but is that actually that useful? Depends on your use case. If you are a professional wanting to have that kind of power in a live setting, obviously it's very useful. At mid volumes, you can tell a bit of a difference in the fullness of the sound, but it's not as extreme as you would actually think. Number of sounds are very similar. Polyphony is very similar, well, basically the same, except for the acoustic piano thing. So we are going to move on to action, because I want to save time for interface and other features, because that's a really extensive comparison on these two. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back in just a second. So there are a lot of extreme differences between these two instruments, but the action might just be at the top of the list. On the one hand, we have, excluding the MP11, because that's a bit of an outlier, this has the longest pivot length of any portable digital piano out there on the market right now. This has the shortest pivot length of any digital portable piano on the market right now. And so you would expect the playing experience on these two to be like wildly different. Surprisingly, in most playing settings with most repertoire, it's not crazy like on the opposite side of things. This stands up, even in comparison to the PHA50 Action, this stands up surprisingly well. There are definitely a few situations where the difference in the pivot length becomes quite obvious. And that's really where you get out of your main playing zone, I'm going to call it the main playing zone, on the keys. For white keys, I generally am playing that key, those keys most of the time about 1 centimeter in from the edge to maybe 1 centimeter in from where the black keys would start. That's the area where I play usually the white keys, and the black keys would be, let's call it within the first inch or so of the black keys. So as long as you're in that zone, which honestly 98% of the keys that I'm going to strike on a keyboard are going to be in that zone, this feels as nicely weighted as this one does. But there's going to be a few settings, settings as in scenarios, where that shorter pivot length really starts to show itself. For beginner players, this is like practically never going to happen. Even for advanced pop players, this is going to very rarely happen. For advanced classical players, this is going to happen on I would say, a semi-frequent basis, which to me, this action kind of disqualifies itself for advanced classical players because of the pivot length. But let's just keep in mind that, as a segment of the market, that's like something like 2 or 3% of the people who are actually buying digital pianos. It's not that they are, not an important component, but I think Casio knows very well that people who are playing at that level are likely going to be looking at the very top of the market, or not even a digital product at all, because of the needs for that control and finesse that typically either an acoustic or a hybrid instrument can only deliver. So there's definitely a few times where the pivot length on the PHA50 becomes obvious, but like I said, it's in a very, very rare few situations, and often only when you're either playing classical or a classical-esque style. Otherwise, oh. Again. Just playing through those two arpeggios. It's really not like a huge difference. They're both well cushioned, so there's not a high level of mechanical noise coming off of either one. They both have the wood sides to the keys, which helps keep that sound nicely muted, as well as is improved cushioning at the bottom of the key bed as well on release. The other big difference I notice is if you're going to be doing some serious finesse playing where it's very chordal, you're doing a lot of kind of voice leading, and you're wanting to voice the chords properly, the longer key stick is going to give you a little bit more control in the super quiet parts of your playing, and the escapement is also going to help that. Triple sensor for most players isn't that relevant. It usually is just important when you're going to be using your MIDI data or your MIDI output for some type of a professional setting. So this has it. We don't believe the 7000 has it. They haven't said either way, but we're assuming that in the absence of it being said, probably just double sensor, no escapement. I should also mention that from a key surface standpoint, these have really pulled very even. The quality of the surface on both of these keys, I would say, is parallel. The ebonies feel great. The white keys also feel great. And so they've got the right amount of slip. Just generally both have a really nice premium feeling. So whereas the PHA50 is really an action that would serve virtually anybody, including the very highest levels of professional use, this is definitely geared towards hobbyist players, contemporary players, people who are either just starting out or even have been playing for a while, but high-level classical just isn't something either they're aiming for or they currently spend a lot of time playing. That's obviously where this is aimed. Third section, we're going to be talking about features, control interfaces, and others. Thanks so much for being with us for this comparison. We'll be right back. So when it comes to the control interface, these instruments have taken a very different approach. The Roland has gone with a highly tactile, like all of the juicy stuff you're going to want on a slider or a button. You've got EQ, which is something that the Yamahas, I know from like 25, 30 years ago, some of the early CP stuff had that onboard EQ. I think some of the Kurzweils did. It was a great feature then that went away for a long time, and it's finally making its way back. You find a lot of instruments now with the onboard EQ. It's super handy, especially in live settings because unless you've got, you know, a talented sound person working your venue, there's going to be times where you're getting way too boomy a signal, or you're getting way too piercing a signal, and you know, the easiest way to do that is just to go and deal with a nice effective, albeit slightly crude EQ, and just sculpt your tone that way. But those are all on sliders. You don't have to dig into a menu to do that. A lot of your record, tempo, this is all on buttons. Your song volume, your mic volume, everything is easy to grab and really intended for people using this in some type of a live setting where going into a menu would just be impractical. You just want it easy to grab, easy to see in the moment. Over here, you have a completely different approach where the aesthetic has definitely been the top priority. They're looking for something that's super clean. They don't want to clutter the look and feel of the instrument with a whole bunch of buttons. And so literally there's like, what, 4 buttons, and one of them is the power button. The other ones are way off to the side. Everything here is touch sensitive. The menu is very well laid out, very easy to access the various functions that you want to get at. Same with the record, same with the playback. And, you know, kind of replacing this whole tactile control thing are these 4 assignable touch buttons. And I make a big deal of this in the individual review because I actually think it is a big deal. You can assign virtually anything to any one of those function keys, and you've got 15 user slots to create 15 different combinations, and that's on top of the default 15 that are already there. And so song play, you've got various functions assigned. Listening, this is to turn the Bluetooth adapter on and off. Surround mode, piano position and mixer. Registration setting. This is your standard EP collection, favorite piano, your effects, your vocals. So a really cool approach here so that you still get your immediate tactile control of things that you want without having to go into a menu. Probably not quite as easy or intuitive as grabbing a slider, but once you're used to that, I think a lot of people, particularly solo pianists who aren't playing in a band setting, or possibly even some band settings, would really dig that functionality. You've got a data wheel here, which is great because that's actually something I would have liked to see on the FP90, is some type of a data wheel, so it made for easier and faster scrolling. Right now you've just got plus and minus and left and right, each of which only operate in single increments. So I know on like the RD series, Roland has always included a data wheel. Would love at some point to see that, or even similar to the smaller data wheel that they've got on their LX series. That would be cool to see as well. So from a navigating within the menu, I actually prefer what Casio has to offer here versus Roland, but out of the box, the sliders on the Roland make this very easy to use, you know, in almost any professional setting. So some, not cons, but some strong points on either side when it comes to the user interface. From a port standpoint, they both have the 1/4 inch outputs, which is kind of just expected at this price point in a professional setting. You don't have to have the local speakers defeated. You can independently turn the speakers on and off, which is also super handy. They've got the USB connection to the computer. They both have Bluetooth audio. They both have Bluetooth MIDI. They both have accompanying apps, which we're going to cover in another video, so watch for a link down in the description. One critical difference over here is the inclusion of a USB audio interface. A lot of people don't really understand what that means. Sometimes they think it just means that you can play USB audio from like a USB key. Not the case. It literally is a data cable that kind of replaces a 2-way audio connection to a computer. So a computer will render its sound through the onboard DA converters on here. So it would be playing through the speakers here. And likewise, any sound this generates can actually go to the computer as digital audio and then be rendered in some sort of like a DAW setting. So it really cuts down on cables and the ease of use, particularly if you're using this in conjunction with a DAW of some kind. Casio doesn't have that. Again, I think this is really just Casio being quite aware of the type of user who's going to be interested in this type of an instrument. As I say, you're going to get, I think, some professionals who are individual solo giggers probably using this, but really just a lot of home users who love the look of this instrument, who are beginner to intermediate players, who've got an ear. They really want a premium sound, but they don't need the cost or the size of getting into like crazy top end actions. And with the exception of this, most of the other manufacturers, you don't get one without the other. You're always paying for top end action when you're paying for top end sound. So an interesting approach to almost kind of separate those two with the Casio. A few other similarities: they both have microphone inputs. And for people where this is important, there's some, some interesting differences here. On the Roland, the effects are fairly basic. You've got compression and you've got echo, so sort of like a reverb effect. But most of the affecting is how the doubling that you can do. So you've got automatic harmonies that the Roland's going to be able to pull out from its microphone. The approach on the Casio is very different. There's really no doubling effect, and they give you a ton of onboard effects to heavily affect your main lead vocal. And you can get into that very easily. And then you have all of these 5 pages, 25? So you've got 25 different mic effects on there, which is very cool. Then you've got your turning your effects on and off. You've got your 3-band EQ. So kind of a different approach when it comes to how that inbound mic audio is going to be treated. So here's some final thoughts. Even though there is some intersection on price here and generally speaking on category, these two pianos I think are intended for super different audiences. With the quality of the furniture and the just permanence of the furniture that the Casio has, plus the heavy emphasis on a fashionable look for this instrument, I would say that they really are expecting probably 80 or 90% of their sales to go to home users who are looking for something that is still very compact, but know that they're buying a quality piece of machinery that's built to last more than just a few years. As I mentioned in the individual review, the stand that comes with the 7000 honestly is probably the highest quality included stand with a portable digital piano that I've ever seen or felt. The fact that it's nice and compact is going to be great for space, but it also means that it's not really targeting people who are super high level players, particularly classical. This is for sure a quality seeking, fashionable buyer who really wants great sound but knows they don't need the best action on the planet, but still wants a good feeling action. And also is going to enjoy a huge range of onboard tones. So this certainly could include some professional use. It's light enough, it's battery operated, which none of the Rolands are, so you could certainly take this to some gigs. FP90 is just this tank, which is going to be, I think, much better fit for people who are going to be using this for a really wide range of professional uses. Somebody buying this, the portability's got to be very, very high on the list of needs. Hope you've enjoyed this comparison. Hope it's been helpful. Just trying to point out where there are some similarities, but mostly discussing the differences and who might care about those differences. My name is Stu Harrison. If this is the first time you've seen me here on Merriam Pianos on YouTube, we would love for you to hit that subscribe and notification bell so we can see you back for more. So take care and have yourselves a great day.